The Australian Curriculum Studies Association would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways from where we are all meeting today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We value the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to education and their continued support of the teaching and learning of all Australians. We recognise that for thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been the first teachers, and that we are committed to continue our learning alongside them. Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode in our series at AXA Insights. This looking at the role of the gifted and talented and how we can support students in our schools. We're delighted today to have Dr. Jae Jung, who is a professor in the School of Education at the University of New South Wales. Now, Professor Jung's primary research is based on decision-making of adolescents, including gifted adolescents, on topics such as careers and career development, university entrance and friendships, normally incorporating some motivational and cultural perspectives. Now, Professor Jung has a string of awards under his belt, including the Award for Excellence in Research from the Mensa Educational Research Foundation in the USA. He's also received the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences APA Top-Up Scholarship from the University of New South Wales. And we will put a link to all of those achievements because they are quite substantial. So we're very pleased to welcome today Professor Jung. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Jung, you've been studying in this very specific area of education in the gifted and talented space with students for over 15 years now. What was the driving factor that led you into that specific space?
There are a number of factors. This being an gifted education is not my first career. I used to be a chartered accountant. So my first degree was a Bachelor of Commerce, and I worked as a chartered accountant for 9 years. Yeah. And I thought I'd have a change of career, and I was always going to go into academia, but related to my earlier degree, I was going to do something in economics or commerce or in the business world. And naively, I thought that I would support myself while I was doing a PhD by becoming a teacher, by working as a teacher. So back then, you could do a 1-year diploma of education to qualify as a teacher, and that meant that I needed to do studies and education, research and education, and I realized, well, this is it. This is my calling, not economics or business or commerce. I much more enjoyed studies in education, and I did my dip at the University of New South Wales, where gifted education was a compulsory subject. So everyone had to do a course, a subject in gifted education. That was my favorite subject. Naturally, that meant that I did honours the following year, did a PhD the following year, and I was lucky to get a job as an academic in gifted education thereafter. Wow. So that's how I came into this field.
Isn't that? Oh, that's wonderful. I love the fact that you've obviously had a previous career in something else, but the way you were speaking there about finding your calling in education, I think it's really important because we're facing quite a crisis in our profession where the negativity surrounding in the media about us, so I think to acknowledge that so many in the profession are genuinely vocational people who have a real passion for the role. So yeah, what a journey you've been on. Now, with regards to gifted and talented education, there is a lot of conversation about the language that we use, and we'll find that especially in schools, people might want to avoid using the term and might use things like advanced or extension groups. But I suppose it's really important for us to be able to understand some of that terminology and maybe how a teacher can identify in terms of not just having a feeling about it, but what are some of the criteria and what's attached to some of that terminology. Could you explain a bit more on that?
Of course. Okay, so in Australia, we follow a model of giftedness developed by a French-Canadian scholar by the name of Francois Gagne. It's called the Differentiated Model of Giftedness and Talent. And according to that model, giftedness refers to someone whose abilities in any area A lot of people focus on the intellectual domain only. You can be gifted physically, you can be gifted socially, you can be gifted creatively as well. So if you're highly able in any domain, and that qualifies you as being the top 10% of your age group, you're considered gifted. So giftedness really refers to high ability in any area. Talent, that's often considered a synonym to giftedness. Talent is high achievement. So giftedness is high ability. Talent is high achievement. And this model is widely adopted across Australia, across all the education sectors as well.
Right.
And you mentioned sort of a reluctance, perhaps a hesitation in using the term giftedness. In the New South Wales Department of Education, they've actually come up with in the past couple of years, they've come up with the new policy, and they've titled it High Potential and Gifted Education Policy. So they've sort of proposed an alternative term of high potential. Giftedness, the term gifted has stuck, but it doesn't really matter what it's called, as long as my concern is that we support those students who are highly able, because they have different educational needs to the rest of the student population. And you asked the question of how do we identify these kids?
Yes.
So what I propose and what the research in the area proposes is that we use a multiple criteria approach. We use multiple instruments to identify our students. So, and this is an acknowledgement of the fact that no instrument is perfect, and also an acknowledgement of the fact that different students respond differently to different instruments. So we look at both what I would call the traditional instruments, like IQ tests, for example. And some IQ tests must be administered only by psychologists, so they can be expensive. So there are teacher-administered IQ tests, like the COGAT, the Cognitive Ability Test. There's also what are called non-verbal ability tests, which don't use language at all. So it uses patterns, visual, spatial stimuli. That's seen as fairer for students who perhaps don't have the same educational opportunities that the more advantaged, more privileged students might have. And then we've got the subjective, non-traditional approaches like teacher nomination. We can have teachers use a checklist or a rating scale to identify the gifted students. So that's a mix. That's a range of them. I suggest that we use a multiple number of them to identify who the gifted students are.
Yes, and I know from reading some of your papers, we also have this term twice exceptional, and I suppose this is one of those ones where if you're maybe a new teacher and you haven't heard the terminology before, it might be say something. Oh well, they're gifted in say math skills, but they're not very good at sport. But that's not really what it is. Twice exceptional. It's very different.
It's very different. Yes. So twice exceptionality refers to the phenomenon of someone being simultaneously gifted in any domain, with having a disabling condition, a disability. So, for example, and it's quite prevalent, by the way. So you could be gifted intellectually, but you also have, for example, dyslexia, or you have ADHD or an autism spectrum, for example. And a lot of people think, well, if you have a disability, you can't be gifted. Or if you are, you can't have a disability. There's sort of a perception of mutual exclusivity of these two things. But it's quite common. It's quite common for gifted students to also have a disability and vice versa. So, and often what happens is teachers will tend to focus on the disability and ignore the giftedness, or vice versa. That leads to a very frustrated student whose educational needs are not being met.
Yes, and I presume as well, it's often many people might assume this twice exceptionality, because a child's gifted that they have maybe social differences or whatever it might be, when actually their gifted needs aren't being met maybe, and that they're not in the right social groups, and not necessarily they have a disability in that area, but
yes, you're right. Yes.
Yeah. Now, your most recent paper has focused on student attitudes and perceptions, and not just gifted students, but the general cohort of students. But your findings produce some really clear guidelines and recommendations for administrative teams in their schools, and the way that they look and approach gifted and talented students. Can you explain a little further about those recommendations?
Okay, so a recent study that I've done with an Australian with Australian students, with Australian teachers, with Australian parents, is on attitudes toward giftedness and gifted education. And if I were to sort of put it in a nutshell, my findings, I found the different types of attitudes that exist. I found the things that predict or influence these attitudes. There's a perception that there's sort of a either or, you're either pro gifted or anti gifted.
Right.
My findings suggest that most people have actually pretty neutral attitudes. And the people who are very pro gifted or anti gifted, they're not in the majority. That was a big finding. Most people have sort of fairly neutral attitudes. We don't have two large and opposing camps. It's sort of most are sort of in that middle group. And the things that influence attitudes, some of the big influences are, number one, the attitude of the school leadership. Okay? So the principal, the deputy principal, sort of the messages that they're sending about education. So sort of whether they're sort of actively promoting it, whether they're actively celebrating achievement, for example. In Australian schools, there's a tendency to celebrate achievement in sport only. And of course, we should celebrate achievement in sport, but we should also celebrate achievement in the same way for the non-physical domains as well. So that's an important consideration. So like school leadership attitudes, that's reflected in things like whether the sort of the messages that are sent in school assemblies, for example, or in newsletters, the sort of whether a gifted policy exists, whether you have things like whether funding is actively devoted to gifted education, for example. So that's an important factor. A second important factor is the level of knowledge that some people have about it. So a real need for teachers to get training for professional development, professional learning, gifted education, for parents to have sort of parent information sessions, this sort of thing. Also, there's a sort of a concern among some quarters about the social, emotional consequences of gifted education. So that's a particular concern among the parent group.
Right. Okay.
And some teachers as well. So the school will often recommend, okay, we've done our assessment. We recommend go here, get gifted education, or get accelerated, or go into the gifted class, etc. And often the parental resistance is, okay, sure, he's got the ability, but I'm not sure about the social side of things.
Okay.
So that's sort of a resistance, sort of source of resistance. But research demonstrates that that's not really a valid concern. Gifted students will often thrive in settings with other gifted students. Gifted students they're different to non-gifted students. They have different things they think about, different things they want to talk about, etc. They will really find their tribe with other gifted students.
That's a really interesting point. I think you're talking about them moving them into different environments, which will be a safe environment for them as well, give them that confidence. And I think when you talk about parental concerns and issues as well, and I think maybe just I suppose from being on the ground, teachers often are reluctant to maybe put anything on a child because they feel then accountable to a parent. So you're saying, I don't want to then be accountable for your child not making the benchmarks, but it's easier maybe to see at the other end where we can improve in academic, because it's more of on that continuum, whereas that kind of gift and talent space is a bit murky for many teachers because
Yes.
and
Because
and
of
I
a
love
lack of
exactly
training. They don't know,
100%.
like they're well-meaning, but they're not trained. In fact, there's only one university at the moment across Australia that has gifted education as a compulsory subject in the pre-service teacher training
Yes.
programs.
And
And do you
and
want
I
to
thought
guess which one that is?
well, I was going to say where you're at is a pretty good place to be. And
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
you spoke about that before, that was so interesting to me because I had 15 years in the British education system,
Hmm.
came over here and was going through the process of my own child. And this conversation of twice exceptionality, I had absolutely no idea. And my
Mm.
husband was doing a bit of teacher training, and he sort of explained, and I thought, I've never heard of this. And then I realized that in general, you might have had one or two lessons in a whole of your 3 4 years,
Yes,
which
yes,
focuses on gifted talented. And it's
exactly.
not, and I think for early career teachers going into a classroom and that weight of expectation already, but then have to maybe accommodate but also identify those students is enormous
It's
and
enormous,
overwhelming.
but particularly if you haven't had the training.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's also to do with the lack of confidence,
Yes.
lack of a perception that I'm able to do something, or often it's sort of
Mm.
reliance on common stereotypes about giftedness, gifted education. Because if they haven't had any
Mm,
training, what do they have to rely on? Stereotypes that people have about giftedness and gifted education. So
definitely.
it's like we pay all this attention to students who are struggling, who have
Mm,
disabilities, and of course we should.
yes.
But equally, we need to provide the same attention to our gifted students.
Yeah. And that's often quite trapped up, caught, caught up in the, as you mentioned before, the funding models of how that
Yes,
works as well, and that
yes,
schools who will definitely pursue in certain areas, so the funding is there,
yes,
whereas you do get more in those areas. Yeah. Now, obviously, we're at Australian curriculum and our focus is curriculum, but we know that in general, curriculums tend to take a very generalized approach to knowledge that's required or the different
yes.
stages of students' education pathways and maybe what is perceived as a developmental pathway of a student. But for
Mm,
gifted and talented students, the curriculum often is not fit for purpose or it doesn't suit
no,
their individual needs and start and actual
no.
pedagogical styles, that area. But for a teacher in a classroom,
Hmm.
what should they be looking for and how to adapt the curriculum and best suit their students' needs?
Okay, so there's so many things that we need to do. I guess we really need to. I promote pre-testing of
Yes.
students. So before a unit of work is going to be presented, doing some
Mm,
pre-testing to establish what portion of this content
yes.
students in the class already know,
Hmm.
and many teachers will be surprised that some students have mastered everything already.
Yeah.
So
Job
pre-testing,
done. Don't need to do
so
anymore.
it doesn't really make sense to present that content when the student has already
No.
mastered it.
Yes.
So it's really there's really a need to do that number one. Number two, really we need to sort of adapt the pacing of the curriculum
Okay.
to the needs of the student, and every student will have different pace
Mm,
needs. Some students
mm,
will respond to a faster pace. The gifted students, some students
mm.
will it'll be too fast for them. For example, we need to adapt the pacing. We need to adapt the sort of the level of the curriculum. So many teachers have a sort of a reluctance, a resistance to go to more advanced levels of the curriculum. If a student has already mastered it, it makes very logical sense to actually do exactly that.
Mm,
And yes, so providing more opportunities that are appropriately pitched, educational
yes.
opportunities that are appropriately pitched to the student. If the teacher is concerned about sort of going to higher levels of the curriculum, um, and there's a lot of reluctance there,
Yeah.
then we can sort of go to areas outside of the curriculum.
Mm,
So that's called enrichment. Advanced
right.
content that's outside of the curriculum, that's called enrichment. Moving to advanced content that will be covered in advanced year levels, that's called
Yes.
acceleration. Some students are highly suited to acceleration, and we need to provide that if they've
Mm,
already mastered the content. So we just need to remember that the way our education system is organized we group our students by age.
Yes.
And
It's a whole new
my
concept.
view
Yeah.
is that's not the best way to group our
No.
students. To be grouping our students on the basis of their readiness
Mm.
to handle the content that will be presented to them. So,
Yes.
and it's not unique to Australia. Most
No, no.
education systems around the world will group students on the basis of age.
Mm.
But we all know that within one mixed ability classroom, there's a very wide range of abilities. And some
Yes.
studies suggest that it can be 6 years, it can be 9 years in the
Mm.
1 year group. It doesn't
Yes.
make sense to provide the same curriculum to
Yeah.
all of these students when there's such a
Mm.
variation in
Yes.
the
And
abilities and readiness.
that multi-age grouping, I think, is becoming such a focus for many parents as well, where the education system isn't sufficient for their children. So they're seeking alternative. You know, we've seen the rise in homeschooling, and a lot of schools that are not I won't say alternative schools per se, but they're looking at different models which best suit those children. And we kind of sometimes can be a little bit complacent thinking, oh, it's the behavior that means they can't fit into a school environment, when actually it's the system that is not providing the support. And then we often find in those situations things like behavior that have been an issue are completely changed because we've provided that. No, that's a really interesting point. Now, specifically your book, it's a beautiful book, but the book focuses on the career decisions of some of these students. And from a digital perspective, you know, I suppose, you know, wrongly, that many students would seek careers that require the highest grade. So if you're gifted, you might be a doctor or you might be a chief engineer. And we've got very vocational pathways that maybe some gifted students feel that they should be going into to kind of validate their ability. And you know, you might get these, we've got to get to this university. You know, I know from especially being in the UK, the Oxbridge gold
Yes,
standard and what you have to
yes.
do to get in. But in your work, you looked at that. But what did you find that maybe surprised you in your research?
Okay, so yes, so there are a number of very unique things about the career decisions, the
Yeah.
career development, the career destinations of highly able students. And
Mm.
as you mentioned, there's a lot of expectation, a lot
Yes.
of sort of social expectation that highly able students pursue prestigious careers, well-paying careers, professional careers,
Yes.
well recognized, reputable careers. So that's a factor in the career
Mm.
decisions. So these high expectations
Mm.
of significant others in the lives of gifted students, the
Yes.
families, the teachers, etc. But then perhaps directly or indirectly, there's high self expectations as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
So it's sort of, it might be related to others' expectations, but or it could just be self-expected, high
Mm.
self-expectations. So that wasn't that surprising to me. I expected that to be an issue, but what was surprising was I gave you earlier the definition of giftedness.
Mm.
That's widely adopted in Australia. So you're gifted if you're highly able in any one domain. Now,
Mm.
um, some people might be surprised that gifted individuals, many are gifted in a number of areas.
Okay. Yes.
So so you have some students who are highly able in maths and less able in English, or
Mm.
vice versa. But you have some students who are sort of highly across the board, or highly
Mm.
able in English, but also very sporting or etc.
Yes.
And this creates dilemmas for
Mm.
the students in their career decision making.
Yeah.
In terms of what do I pursue, and then many gifted students have perfectionistic tendencies, which means that there's a concern about making the perfect career decision, and
Mm.
that doesn't exist.
No.
Also, in this day and age, most people don't have a single career; they have multiple careers. So, I
Yes.
believe perhaps that gifted students are sort of well positioned in this new
Mm.
new world of people going through multiple careers in their lifetimes. And I'm not sure if you've read the research or the newspapers or the media in this area, but many people think that in the future, people will be going through many career changes. So it will be very unlikely that people will have one job for their entire lives. There will be much less job security, a lot more freelancing, a lot more people sort of not having a job, but sort of a series of projects that they're working in. I believe that with gifted individuals, their multi-abilities, it's formerly called multi-potential, their capabilities across multiple fields, their sort of willingness to learn, it sort of puts them in a really good place, really good position to sort of to survive in this new career age. Another thing that perhaps surprised me a little was this the idea that gender expectations. So in addition to social expectations about highly paying, highly reputable careers, there's also expectation that people pursue careers that are compatible with their gender. And I was surprised that this is still like, and this is something that relates to everyone, not just individuals. But this was something else that I found was it's still the sort of the barriers have been broken to some extent, but it's still an issue. So it's very unlikely for a gifted individual, like gifted male, to sort of pursue a career that's seen as feminine. For example, like nursing. That's sort of much less likely. It's much more likely for a gifted female to pursue a male career, like to become an engineer, than the other way around.
Wow. Yes. When you think of that, because obviously I do a lot of work in women in STEM, and so we're pushing against that glass ceiling of getting women in. But I think that has got quite a movement. But when you flip it the other way, you go, oh, actually, and maybe we see it a bit with men in classroom or primary school classrooms. That's the only really comparative one I can think of. But I think you mentioned as well about the expectation, and what was interesting when you talked about lifelong learning, because I think we can be in danger with gifted and talented students that they've burnt out by the time they've left their education, because and they might have a reluctance to keep learning because it's kind of it's become this roller coaster, as you're saying, with this element of perfection, and suddenly the real wide world is very different to maybe some of those stricter forms. And I think that's probably a good point, that longevity of career, it's actually probably more the skills and the attributes of the students than the knowledge base, which we get caught
nowadays in this information age.
Now what I was really keen when I looked at your work, you've authored and co-authored some work regarding rural education, and I think you briefly mentioned before about the educational opportunities people have, but having taught myself in a regional town with children, very different children from very different backgrounds, I've taught some exceptionally able students, and I found it very tricky because I literally at the point was saying, I can't teach you any more in the specific area. I can help and guide you, but it's very self-driven, self-learning, and I hadn't got the resources to pursue and help that student. So I suppose a lot of geographical is the issue, and there might be barriers in that sort of sense, and expose them to a variety of options. Say you're in a mining town, it's really just engineering or mining on that sort of side. There's might not be as many artists or that kind of creativity.
No.
What do you think are some of the challenges our rural students are facing in that area?
Yes, so multiple challenges. So our city kids don't know, shouldn't take for granted all the opportunities that they should be getting, because they don't know what it's like. That most of them don't know what it's like to be a student in a rural area. And there are positives in rural areas as well, of course, like, for example, smaller class sizes, sort of more community, like perceptions of more community cohesion, like access to community resources, etc. But there's also multiple challenges. For example, things like a smaller number of gifted students. So a smaller number of gifted students to socialize with, to sort of really be friends with. Not that gifted students can't be friends with non-gifted students. Also, greater likelihood of poverty in rural areas than in urban areas. sort of often community attitudes tend to be more negative about education in general and gifted education as well. A lack of experienced teachers are training gifted education. So that applies across the board, but even more so perhaps in rural areas, lack of access to identification instruments, lack of a range, the lack of range and rigor in the gifted programs that are available. So that's a lot of things that gifted students in rural areas are facing. And I guess in New South Wales, we're trying to overcome it. For example, have you heard of Aurora College?
That's yes. Like I don't know much about it, but yes.
So that's like an online school designed for gifted students in rural areas of New South Wales. So, but like online teaching, that's better than obviously not having it. But there's a difference between being able to come face to face in an actual physical school and online arrangements. So there are.
I was just about to say that because I remember having taught a student going up to the high school in a regional area. And, you know, what you do find as well in regional towns is a lot of teachers out of field. So, you know, oh, you did engineering, you could be the maths teacher and you can teach eight, you know, all of those sorts of things. And I remember, obviously, he got into what we call the GATE program over in, you know, Western Australia and was probably in the top 1%, was exceptional. And then I suppose the realization for me was that if they didn't have the option to go to boarding school and his parents didn't want that he was put in a room and supervised online.
Yes.
And I remember just going, oh, we've got a teacher there and they're super. But there was all these children really just working with a gifted and talented school program. But you're right as well in that sense, is we are providing, but it may be the cost of some of the other elements that students require. And the other thing you actually mentioned, which made me think in my head, is also that the cultural maybe instruments that we use are not appropriate for many students in regional areas. Yeah, and I think that's a thing that you have to sort of, as a teacher, you also have to rely on your instincts and your feelings about individual students to say, oh, this is the way it is now. We talk about this, and obviously people on the ground, the teachers, are facing these things every day, but they can often be, and we refer to, very overwhelmed to teach students who often possess skills and knowledge which is way beyond what the teacher themselves might know. You know, especially I think I see it probably more in the primary sector. If you've got a young boy in year 4, a young girl who's actually at year 8, year 9 maths, and we know as well, especially in that specific area, maths anxiety is a huge concern for a lot of primary school teachers. So what can we do to support teachers to raise their confidence again, I suppose, so that students can get the best chance for success?
There's a common perception that the teacher has to be gifted himself or herself
to
teach gifted students. That's an unnecessary that's an unnecessary qualification. You don't have to be gifted yourself to teach a gifted student. I guess the only real thing that I would like to see across Australian schools and across teachers in Australia is, as long as you have training in gifted education, as long as you know what to look for, as long as what you know the different strategies that are available to help gifted students, I think that's enough. So I guess it just boils down to training in gifted education. Having pre-service teacher training programs across the country have gifted education as a compulsory subject. I'm not sure if you know, but in New South Wales, special education has been compulsory in all universities in New South Wales since the early 90s, but not gifted education. And often what happens is the special education lecturer will do one lecture in gifted education, which is not really in that the special education lecturer's expertise. So that's what's happening. So a need for the new teachers coming into the profession to have training in gifted education. And if that hasn't happened, making sure that we offer training to those teachers who are already working. I think that's all that is necessary. You don't have to be gifted yourself. And no teacher can claim, even if you're gifted, even if you're the most highly able teacher in the world, no teacher can teach every subject to the most advanced levels. That's just not a realistic expectation.
No.
So it's just, you just need training in gifted education, and and hopefully all teachers get training in gifted education, because there's often a perception that, oh well, we don't have any gifted kids at my school. That the correct version of that statement should be, we don't have any gifted kids who are achieving to the potential at this school. You have a lot of underachieving gifted students who are not achieving to their potential at this school. And it's your job as a teacher, as a school, to support these kids to achieve to their potential. That's what gifted education is about.
And, and I think that, I suppose that naivety in some areas of not knowing, if I remember thinking, if I was going into a meeting, a case conference of a child who was struggling in a specific area, I was pretty well equipped to have a conversation with the parent and say, well, we're doing this, this, this is what's happening. But I would be much more, have a lot more trepidation going into a meeting with, say, a parent of a gifted and talented child, because I would be worried about what their perception or what they would like from, and then I wouldn't have those skills to say, oh, this is what I'm doing, because exactly what you're saying, we haven't had the training in that.
And it's not your fault. It's not the teacher's fault.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I guess once you are a teacher, there are some teachers who recognize, well, I would benefit from training in gifted education, and they will advocate for some professional development in gifted education at their school, or they will do what I do. They will do a postgraduate degree, postgraduate study in gifted education. Many of these teachers will take matters into their own hands by doing this.
And that's very important in a system where we are often being, off-the-shelf product or whatever it is for the general, and then we go, oh, hang on a second, I've got to change everything. And it is very much a personal, well, I want to learn how to support it, not as a collective. And that's where I see what you mentioned, that is a real need for administration to come in
really
and say,
come to the equation here. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
And we just need to remember that every teacher will have gifted students in their classrooms. And it's only those gifted kids whose teachers have taken this initiative to get training who will be supported. There will be some teachers who sort of rely on common stereotypes and say, well, gifted kids will look after themselves, and I need to focus on the struggling kids. There's a common perception there. You're doing a huge disservice to the gifted kids here.
And we often get caught in that trap of having extension lessons where the gifted children go off and do their one lesson a week, or maybe a few lessons a week with one teacher who's maybe got some training in, or was more trained than the next person. So that's often something as well.
That's inadequate, because it's sort of, a lot of teachers say, well, I've ticked this box because I've sent my gifted child off to training. But we have to remember that gifted students are gifted students full time. They're not gifted students for 1 hour a week.
Yes, and that doesn't meet their needs, definitely. Now, Professor Jung, I've had the most lovely conversation. I could speak all day on this matter, because it's obviously something myself learning about something new, and especially in this area, is exceptionally rewarding. But we get to the end, and this is a really important question, because we've all been there. We all know someone who put us on this trajectory. So I guess, who was your favorite teacher, or who's been more influential to you in your career so far?
Okay, so I'll just tell you a little bit more about my background as well here. I've had my education in 3 different countries.
Oh, wow.
I'm not Caucasian. I was originally born in South Korea, so I've had my education in South Korea. When I was in primary school, my father was posted to Los Angeles branch of the bank he was working at. So I entirely moved to Los Angeles, California, when I was in primary school, or elementary school, as they call it there. So 4 years of elementary school in America, back to Korea, and then when I was in year 6, my father was posted to the Sydney office of the bank. that's how we first came to Australia. So I've had my educational experiences in 3 different countries, and I've had exposure to many teachers. I'm not going to pinpoint the favorite teacher because I feel that I've benefited from all of my teachers. Yeah. They've all had very different styles, coming from 3 different countries, 3 different training systems. They all had very different styles. They all did their best to provide me with a good education. What I do, the qualities that I do remember of my teachers is I was always a very good student, and they all recognized my potential, and they all did their best to help me to reach that potential in the way that they felt was appropriate. So it was different for each different teacher because they were in different countries, different education systems. But I just remember that acknowledgement of me as a good student and the way they helped me.
Definitely. And isn't that just part of what, our 8 standards that we're producing students for, is know your student? That's the most important part as being a teacher. Know your student. And that, children respond really well to that because they know. They're very good at that perception. So, I understand that has been a wonderful conversation, Professor Jung, and I do hope that more people will reach out and follow your work. And I was very intrigued reading some of the papers the other day. It was really exciting to do. So I do hope you get some more people coming along. So we will post all the details about Professor Jung's work in our kind of podcast series, and we do hope to hear from our listeners soon. Thank you.
Thank you.